once it's a closer race, they might. But I don't know why Linda would want to debate right now. I mean, she said 40-something%. Why would she want to debate? And if she's not going to debate Rob, I'm just going to debate me. So, unfortunately, I don't think there's going to. My guess would be there won't be any more debates before the convention. But I'd have one every day. I mean, yeah.
Peter, while you're in the Senate proposing your plan for the economy, what you do in the meantime to close the gap between American business needs and American industry today until we get to a point where we're more stable? How do you help them?
Well, what we need is capital in this country. And capital comes from savings. In order to have businesses, you need tools, you need machines. And they're expensive. And they come from savings. And we don't have it. And what little savings we have are being spent by the government. So we need to encourage savings. So we need to stop discouraging spending and borrowing, which is what our tax code does, what our government policy does. So we have to let interest rates go up. We can't have interest rates at zero. They have to be much higher. Nobody's going to save any money if interest rates are zero. And the problem with these low interest rates are businesses can't borrow at low interest rates. All the money goes to Wall Street. It goes to J.P. Morgan. It goes to Goldman Sachs. It goes to Morgan Stanley because they're too big to fail. They've got government backstops. We have to let those companies go bankrupt. We can't keep propping them up at the expense of the real economy. So we have to let interest rates go up so that we can save our money again. Americans have to stop buying stuff for a while. We bought too much stuff. We have to live with what we have for a while so we can rebuild our savings so that businesses can grow. And then we have to start repealing all sorts of government rules and regulations that have been added onto the economy. As I said, my own business, there are so many more rules and regulations in the last decade. Why do we need them? The brokerage industry was here in the 1990s. It's worse now. People have gotten worse investment advice with all these new regulations than before they existed. All they do is needlessly run up the cost of doing business. But I'm not concerned about the financial industry. That industry needs to shrink. It's manufacturing. I've talked to people. You look at all these rules on manufacturing. You can't make anything in this country competitively anymore. That has to change. And we have to stop vilifying employers and talking about workers' rights and appealing to workers. Just because you're a worker doesn't mean you have special rights. Everybody has rights. They're individual rights. You don't get rights because you take a job. You don't lose rights because you employ somebody. But the government keeps giving workers all these supposed privileges, and they've got so many privileges they're now unemployable because nobody can afford them. The only jobs we can now afford are service sector jobs because you don't need any capital. You don't need a machine. You just stand there and ring up a cash register. But those jobs are all going to disappear when all the goods coming in from abroad stop coming because we can't pay for them. So cutting all these regulations, and then of course we need lower taxes. But we can't have lower taxes unless we have smaller government because the taxes pay for government. So we have to eliminate a lot of government, and that means a lot of government jobs. But we can't worry about people losing jobs in the public sector because they'll get jobs in the private sector if the government gets out of the way, and they'll get productive jobs better. Yes?
What federal departments would you mention?
Oh, I'd like to get rid of a lot of them. I mean, one of them I mentioned is the Department of Energy, which spends about $30 billion a year. That department was created in 1979 by Jimmy Carter. The reason we created it was to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Well, back then we imported about 40% of our oil. Now we import 70%. Obviously, it didn't work, so why don't we get rid of it? Right? The Department of Education, we're spending $80 billion a year there. The government doesn't educate anybody. Why don't we leave the money in our local communities so they can spend it? Meanwhile, what does the Department of Education do? Subsidizes student loans to the point that college tuitions are now so expensive that no one can afford to go without them. If the government simply stopped subsidizing student loans, right, we'd save a lot of money and tuition prices would plunge and our kids could go to college and it wouldn't cost that much money. So you've got all these government departments. The Department of Agriculture. What is the main function of the Department of Agriculture right now? To make food more expensive than it would be without the Department of Agriculture. They subsidize farmers not to grow food. They try to keep prices higher than they would be in a free market. Why would we want to do that? In fact, one of the things the Department of Agriculture does is they subsidize tobacco farmers. And they spend about the same amount of money subsidizing tobacco farmers as the government spends running ads convincing us not to smoke the tobacco that they're subsidizing. I mean, none of it makes any sense. There are so many departments that we can abolish that we don't need. There's others that we can consolidate. See, government is like, it's a growth industry. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. because that's how politicians get reelected. They want more, they want to be able to meet more promises. They need more jobs for the people who help them get elected, and that has to end. Because the bigger government gets, the smaller the economy gets. The bigger government gets, the more resources it drains from the private sector to sustain itself. Because the government doesn't produce anything. We produce. We have to produce enough to support the government. But at some point, you got too many people taken out of the pot, and not enough people putting in. The pot's empty.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, I guess we're out of time.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, one last question, and then you've given us some wonderful insight, but we do have other people to talk to. So, one more question, and
Well, we've talked about economics. How about 2 questions? Pro-life, pro-choice, gun control.
So I'll take gun control first. I am a very strong supporter of the right to bear arms. It's the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution for a reason. There should be no laws written about the federal government in any way to infringe the right to bear arms. That includes, automatic weapons. I mean, I guess I wouldn't extend it to nuclear warheads or biological things, but we need to be able to protect ourselves. And the founding fathers wrote the Second Amendment not even because to protect ourselves from criminals, which is important, right? Because when you have gun control, the only people that abide by the law are the law-abiding citizens. The criminals don't care. In fact, the criminals love gun control because it means that their victims are defenseless. If I was a criminal, I would want the most strict gun control laws in the state that I was in, because I would know I could go and rob the house and not have to worry about somebody shooting me. Right? The fact that if the citizens are armed, then the criminals will think twice because they risk a lot if they're going to break into your house. But the real reason that the founding fathers wanted the right to bear arms is because they didn't trust the government. They wanted Americans to defend themselves, to keep the government in check. Whenever you have a tyrannical government, the first thing they do is they disarm the citizens because they don't want the citizens to be able to resist. And it's not that I think the U.S. government is so bad yet that we need to arm ourselves. But you know what? It might be in the future. You never know what is going to happen in the future. And you know what? The government is going to act much differently if they know that we can protect ourselves than if we're defenseless. So we need to have that amendment in there. It's not because of hunters or anything like that, even though nothing wrong with being a hunter. But it's not about that. It's about personal defense, so we can defend ourselves against criminals, and so we can defend ourselves against a criminal government should that government get that bad. As far as what was the first question? Right to life, pro-choice. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much pro-choice on everything. A lot of people that say they're pro-choice on abortion are anti-choice just about everything else. But my view on things like abortion is that it's not the federal government's business. The government shouldn't be promoting abortion. It shouldn't be spending money on abortion, and it shouldn't be infringing in states' rights to interfere with abortion if that's what the state wants to do. So if a state wants to impose a restriction on abortion, whether it's you can't have an abortion in the last trimester, or you can't have a partial birth abortion, or you need parental consent if you're a minor, all those things are within the province of the state, and you have to look to your state constitution to decide whether or not the state can do it. But the federal government needs to stay out of it. The Roe v. Wade decision was wrongly decided. That was the Supreme Court, making law on its own. So I'm against that. So from that perspective, I'm probably the most pro-life candidate in the race. From what I would do from a senatorial position. But my personal preference, I would be pro-choice. But as a senator, I have no say in the matter.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Peter. I hate to wrap this up because I'm sure we could talk all night. Thank you very much for appearing.
Sure, thanks for having me. And any other questions that anybody has, visit my website, Schiff for Senate. There's a lot of information. You can go to YouTube and put in Peter Schiff or Google. All sorts of things you can read. I've written on my corporate website, Europac.net. I've written articles on economic topics for 4 or 5 years. They're all there. My radio show archives. There's so much information. I've touched on every subject. I've stepped on every single political third rail imaginable. By all normal standards, it's impossible for me to get elected. But I think, given the circumstances today, this is exactly the time that a guy like me can get elected. And so I don't want to blow that opportunity. But anyway, thank you.
As we say, thank you very much, Peter. next speaker is